Hey guys, Peter Treadway from hybridpeter.com here. Thanks for joining me. So in this week's video, we're going to be looking at layer masks in Photoshop to blend two differently lit images like this to make one beautifully lit image like this. Okay, so these are our two source images that we're using in Photoshop, and as you can see from the image over here on the left, I've already done a little bit of work in Adobe Camera Raw to really bring those gorgeous sunset colours out in the background here. But as we move down to look at the couple, they've obviously been naturally lit here, no external light on them here at all, and so they're very, very dark and dull in the foreground. No good, obviously, for a wedding image. And so when we move over to the image on the left here, you can see the couple are fantastically lit. But unfortunately my buddy Dave is in the image here. Now we've had to do this because we're using a smaller budget light setup. We've had to get that much closer to the couple. Now part of this tutorial is also to show you that you don't need the big expensive Elinchroms or Profotos or anything like that to get these images. They do make life simpler because of course you can then stand way off camera and you can get this image in one shot without needing any of this Photoshop trickery. However, I wanted to show you as well that this can be done on a budget. We're using a 24-inch newer softbox here, which I think you can pick up for about £30 or £40 on eBay. In here we've got a Yongnuo YN560 Mark III flash with the trigger on my camera, which again on eBay you can pick up for around £50 or £60. And then we've just got a light stand, a very basic, cheap budget light stand. Again, easily sourced on eBay or Amazon or any other cheap auction sites of that ilk. And this is a very, very cheap setup, just to show that you don't need an absolute arsenal of big lights to get this done. Of course, you will then have to employ a bit of Photoshop, but you know that's where part of the fun of photography is these days with digital photography. So yeah, moving on, we need to get rid of Dave from this picture because again we can't present this image to the couple as it is. So the first thing that we need to do is select our image here, and over in the layers panel here, if we drag this layer all the way over into this other image and let it go, and then you can see now we can actually get rid of this image. We'll just minimize that one and we'll expand our desktop. There we go. And so you can see now we've got two layers. The underground layer, the underneath layer, sorry, is the original layer, and this top layer is the one that we've just dragged across. And if you just click on the little eyeball symbol here, you can see we can reveal and conceal that top layer. Now what you'll also notice there is that as I click on that eye icon and go between the layers, you can see that there's a slight amount of movement in the picture there. Now ideally if I was working on a tripod we wouldn't have that movement. But at this part of the day in the wedding, we were literally running and gunning at this point. So we were losing this light desperately. We're desperately quick. We're running around the venue. We're trying to get as many shots as possible, and we just didn't have the time to use a tripod. So I was actually hand-holding the camera when taking these shots. Hence, I took this image. I think I took this image first of Dave in the shot, and then he quickly ran out of the shot, and I took another image. But obviously, in the second or so it took for that to happen, I moved the camera slightly, and so the angle of composition is slightly different there. Now, it's not a mega issue. It actually brings up quite a teachable moment, and I can show you how I got around that issue a bit later on. But it's just something to bear in mind at the moment. If you're working on a tripod, the camera will be absolutely rock solid and you shouldn't have this issue. But again, it's nice to see these things so you can see that when you do get problems like this, they're not insurmountable. So the first thing that we want to do is conceal this top layer, because what we want to do is just look at the underneath layer and then build on that by using our brushes and using our layer masks to then reveal only parts of the top layer that we want to be seen. So the first thing that we do is come down here to the bottom of the layers panel, and we pressing Alt or Option on a Mac or a Windows machine and clicking this new layer mask icon down the bottom here. Now by holding down the Alt or Option key, we're actually going to create a layer mask that's inverted, and what that means is that we're going to create a black layer mask. Now, remembering that white reveals and black conceals, what we've effectively done there is by adding this black or inverted layer mask to this top layer, we've concealed that top layer. So again, white reveals, black conceals. So now we've filled that entire layer with a black color. It's completely concealed that layer. What we can now do is by grabbing our brush, either from the tools panel over here on the left hand side, or by clicking the hotkey B on your keyboard, and coming down and looking at our colors here, making sure that we've got white selected as our foreground color, because now we've concealed that layer, we want to reveal parts of it. So we can either click on the little double arrow here to toggle the colors backwards and forwards, or we can simply press the X key to toggle backwards and forwards. Another important thing to consider here is that if you've been into do another project in Photoshop and these colors are all sorts of crazy, you've not got your default colors set over here. You don't have to go all the way into the color palette here and try and select your black and your white. If you simply hit the D key, and if you look at the two colors down here on the left, if you hit your D key for default colors, that immediately takes you back to your default colors of black and white. So if we look at our brush settings up the top here, we want a very soft brush. So I've got hardness there set to 0%, and I've got quite a small brush there that you can see on screen. So I'll probably increase the size of that a little bit, which you can do by clicking the left and right square bracket keys to increase and reduce the size of that brush. So again, making sure that we've got the layer mask selected over here, and we've got our foreground color set to white. With our brush tool, we can just start to brush in that layer on top. Brush and making sure to go all the way over the couple, making sure they're nice and clear. And there we go. We've brushed that top layer back in, and we've revealed only that part that we want to see. Now you need to be careful here, because if you start going too far, you can see there that you'll start brushing back in elements that you don't want to see. But it's not a problem if you do that. You can just hit the X key again to swap the default colors around, and so you've now got black as your foreground color. And then with your brush tool still selected, you can just brush the layer beneath back in, and there you go. And so that looks pretty good. I'd be quite happy with that. And if you look at that image just as it is there, I think the couple would probably be quite happy with that. However, as perfectionists, as photographers, we can never rest on our laurels like that. And so if we zoom in just to behind the groom's head here, you can see where that problem with me hand holding the camera really comes in. You can see just at the back here that there's a slight discrepancy at the water's edge there. Now, again, this isn't a problem. It provides us with a teachable moment. So what we'll do in these circumstances is making sure that the layer mask is selected. What we can do is bring the opacity down to about 50% or so, thereabouts. And straight away you can see the difference in the two layers there, and how much difference there is between them. Not a problem though if we just come up here and select our move cursor. And so when I'm making big movements, you can use the move tool just to move the layer mask around. But when I'm making minute movements, I prefer to use the cursor keys because it just gives a little bit more precision. Now, you want to largely ignore actually what the couple look here. I know they look slightly ghosted at the moment, but what we're really concerned about is this area back here, as I say, down the water's edge. Now that looks pretty good there. Again, you just want to make sure that those two lines match up fairly closely, and again, we need to not worry too much about what the couples look like, because once we bring the opacity back up to 100%, all you're going to see is the part of the layer that you've brushed back in. You're not going to see the dark parts underneath. And so when we look here at the water's edge, we can see there's no problem there at all, so that's fantastic. We can zoom back out again, and we're nearly finished. Now, the only thing that I would add now, and this is purely a matter of personal preference, but for me, you can see in this image by the shadows on the front of the bride, slight shadow on the front of the bride's face here, and on the groom's back and down the front of the dress, you can see that light is coming in from the top right here. Now, For me, I think it then looks a bit odd if you don't have a little bit of light fall off down the bottom here at the bottom of the couple. And again, this is personal preference, but I like to just come down with a little bit of revealing that layer there, just to mimic a little bit of light fall off at the bottom of the image there, and it just makes the image look a little bit more natural. And although you have photoshopped the image largely, you don't want it to look like that. So by putting that bit of light fall off there, mimicking light fall off, you make the image look a lot more natural. So there you go, guys. That's the finished image. Didn't take too long at all. Just some very, very simple techniques in Photoshop, and by using some very, very budget kit on the day, you can end up with some absolutely fantastic images that will completely wow your clients. So for this video, we've obviously used a couple of my wedding images, but this technique will work with any two images where you've got a brightly lit background and a foreground with a poorly lit subject. So give it a go, guys. I'd love to see how you get on with this tutorial. Show me your images online, share them online, and tag me at HybridPeter across all the social media platforms, and I'd love to see what you've got up to. So thanks very much for tuning in. I'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.